Today I'm going to take an obituary and I'm going to pull it apart. I'm going to find all the facts, all the clues, all the ancestors, all the leads, everything that we need to help build our family history. And you can play along. We're going to get into all of that coming up next. Okay, I think you're going to get a kick out of this. Now, I grabbed an obituary off of newspapers.com. No relation to my family. I just grabbed one that I thought would work great for this exercise. If you want to play along, you can go to the description box on the YouTube channel right below this video. There is a link there to download the PDF for this obituary. And so what you can do is try and count how many clues you can come up with. This would be really facts, which includes ancestors, leads and sources. Collectively, you know, those are the three buckets that I'm going to pull out of this obituary. And this obituary really is only about 7 paragraphs long. It's not very long at all, but I just thought it would be fun to try and see how many you come up with compared to how many I come up with. Because I have a ton of stuff, and I promise you, you're going to learn something new or think differently about obituaries than maybe you did before. So we're going to jump into all of that here in just a moment. Don't forget to download it if you want to. So each ancestor, clue, lead, you know, all of that stuff counts. Everything you can find out of this obituary will count. And then you can stop the tape, go see how many things you can find in it, and then when you're done, play the video again, and we will dice and slice this obituary to the point that you'll be amazed at what we find. So we'll talk more about that. There is going to be a handout for this that's free that you can get all the answers for. We'll talk more about that at the end of the show. And I hope you like this. Give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So, all right, let's jump into it. And if you're going to play along, stop the tape right now, go count the leads and clues, and then come back. Okay, are you back? All right, let's get into it. So here's the obituary for a guy named Tally E. Davis. It says he dies suddenly. I'm going to zoom in a lot so we can see this very carefully. So Tally E. Davis dies suddenly. Okay, so this is from the Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania record on 15th of April, 1940, page 8. Okay, and if you're not a subscriber to newspapers.com, it really doesn't matter because you can download the PDF that I provide for you. Okay, now, this is going to be fun. Okay, it says, Tally E. Davis dies suddenly. Plymouth native, was a sales agent for the Atlantic Coal Company. Tally E. Davis, 56, brother of David T. Davis, state mine inspector of this city, died suddenly on Friday of a heart attack at Medford, Mass., according to word received on Saturday by local relatives. Mr. Davis was born in Plymouth and was educated in the public school of that borough in Wyoming Seminary. He was the son of the late Jenkin and Elizabeth Davis, early settlers of the West Side. For many years, he resided on High Street, Plymouth. Starting his career in the coal business with Cunningham and Company, he later became a sales manager. Gosh, I hope I don't mispronounce this. The Susquehanna Collieries Company in Nanticoke, I think. I apologize if you're from that area. For the last 20 years, Mr. Davis has been employed in the sales division at the Atlantic Coal Company with headquarters in Medford, Mass. Before settling in that city, he resided several years in Buffalo, New York. He was one of Medford's prominent residents and served for several years as the chairman of the council in that city. He was affiliated with various organizations and took part in all civic enterprises of Medford. Surviving is his widow, Teresa, or Theresa, depending on how you want to pronounce it, and 4 children. Richard, a student at Harvard University, Eugene, a student at Massachusetts Tech, Elizabeth, a student at LaSalle College, and Charlotte at home, and 2 brothers, David T. Davis of this city, and Ever Davis, superintendent of Plymouth Mining Company. Mr. and Mrs. T.D. Davis and Ever Davis, left on Saturday for Medford, where he will attend the funeral services on Monday afternoon. Burial will be held at Medford. Okay, let's take this apart. So here's some of the answers to what I found, but I'm not going to give you the total just yet. So what we're going to do is we're gonna kind of start ripping this apart and talk about all the little things that we found. So the first thing we know, this date is April 15th, 1940. Okay, just keep that in mind for a moment. Tally E. Davis. There's a hint right there. He has a middle name that starts with an E. Dies suddenly. He dies suddenly, which makes me wonder if he has a will. Because he died suddenly. Sometimes people don't write their wills until they know they're going out. Okay? He was a native of Plymouth. Plymouth native. Likely born in Plymouth. Okay? And by the way, this is Pennsylvania, so this is Plymouth, Pennsylvania, not Plymouth, some other state. He was a sales agent. There's an occupation right there. And for the Atlantic Coal Company. So he worked for the Atlantic Coal Company at the time he died. Okay, another fact, okay? Tally E. Davis. 56. All right, so he's 56 years old at the time he dies. The newspaper article is written on the 15th of April, 1940. If we do the math, that means that he had to have been born between the 10th of April, 1883 and the 11th of April, 1884. That's the way I do it. What? Wait a minute. The 11th of April? What do you mean, Connie? The 11th of April. This newspaper article was written on the 15th. Yeah, but we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a second. All right. It says Tally E. Davis, 56, brother of David T. Davis. So he has a brother. The brother has a middle initial, which is another hint or clue or lead that the middle name needs to be investigated for the brother. Okay. The brother was the state mine inspector of this city, which the way this is written gives me the indication that this guy was really something big, right? The brother, David T. Davis, was prominent for some reason. And being the state mine inspector, he probably was kind of a big deal, right? All right, so Tally died suddenly on Friday of a heart attack. This newspaper article was written on a Monday. If we do the math backwards, that means that he died on Friday, April 12th. He died Friday of a heart attack. So he died on April 12th, 1940, because this article was written on the 15th on a Monday. So if we count backwards, you know, Sunday was the 14th, Saturday was the 13th, Friday was the 12th, okay? He died of a heart attack at Medford, Massachusetts. So we have his death date, we have his death place. According to word received on Saturday, another clue, Saturday was the 13th, by local relatives. That means there's family living in Plymouth or the Wilkes-Barre area. Mr. Davis was born in Plymouth. He was educated in the public schools. There's another one of that borough. The Plymouth borough is what I infer from that. So he went to public school in Plymouth and Wyoming Seminary. So now we have two pieces of education. The Wyoming Seminary gives me the indication that he was of a Christian religion. He was the son of Jenkin and Elizabeth Davis. So we know Jenkin Davis was his father and Elizabeth, without a maiden name, was his mother. So we don't know her maiden name, but we at least know her first name. They were early settlers of the West Side. Okay, so that clue right there is the West Side is kind of the location within the Plymouth area, but early settlers tells me that Jenkin and Elizabeth Davis were not born in Plymouth. They migrated to Plymouth from somewhere else. For many years, he resided on High Street, Plymouth. Okay, so that was back to Tally, who died. That is a clue that we could look for in census records. Starting his career in the coal business, there's occupational information right there, with Cottingham and Company. Quick Google search of Cottingham and Company. They are still around. It appears that they are a supply company. He later became a sales manager of the Susquehanna Collieries. I had to look that up. Company and Nanticoke. So there's another clue of a location, another occupational piece of data that we can put in his profile. For the last 20 years, this is 1940 when he dies. So that means from about 1920 to about 1940, Mr. Davis was employed as in the sales division of the Atlantic Coal Company. So now we have another occupational clue. We have a time frame of 20 years, 1920 to 1940, and it was headquarters in Medford, Mass. So the company is headquartered in Medford, Mass, which gives me the indication that Tally is living in Medford, Mass. Pretty strong clue that he's living there, and he died there. If you remember, he died of a heart attack at Medford, Mass. So going back down to the fourth paragraph, for the last 20 years, Mr. Davis has been employed as in the sales division at Atlantic Coal Company with headquarters in Medford, Mass. So we have a location, we have a residence, we have an employer, and we have a time frame. Okay, before settling in that city, I'm assuming they're talking about that city being Medford, Mass, that he resided for several years in Buffalo, New York. Okay, so now we take Buffalo, New York as a residence, another clue, and we go, the end date is probably about 1920, so going backwards several years, we don't know what several years is. I would infer that to be like maybe 3 to 5 years, so maybe we can put into his profile an approximate residence from about 1915, 1917, somewhere in there, to 1920 about. He was living in Buffalo, New York. And we're going to talk more about all of this here in a moment. He was one of Medford's prominent residents and served for several years as chairman of the council in that city. All right, so he was one of the prominent residents. Okay, clue, he was well known in the community. Okay, maybe had money. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And for several years was chairman of the council of that city, so he held office there. Another clue. He was affiliated with various organizations. Doesn't really say, but it might be worth searching. Okay. He took part in all civic enterprises of Medford. I'm not exactly sure what they mean by that. Further investigation might disclose that, though. All right, so now we start getting into some of the ancestors. Surviving are his widow, Teresa, and 4 children. We have Richard Davis, we can add to the profile. He is a student at Harvard University. All right, so Richard, well, Teresa is the first person to be added, okay? Richard Davis would be likely the first child because typically in an obituary or in a will, people are written in chronological order of their birth. However, I've often found that in obituaries, the boys are listed first and the girls are listed second, regardless of their order. So it would be the oldest son followed by the second son, even if there was a girl in between there. Okay. Eugene is the second son, even though it doesn't say that. We can imply that it is. He is a student at Massachusetts Tech. Okay. So both universities are giving us a really strong clue that this family has money. Harvard, clearly. Massachusetts Tech is now MIT, and that is in Cambridge. Okay. Elizabeth is likely the first daughter as a student at LaSalle College, and Charlotte is likely the youngest child, is at home. And because she's at home, that makes me think that she's likely a teenager, but she could be a child, okay? And the reason why I say this is because all of the other children of this couple are, or at least of the deceased, not necessarily the mother. It doesn't say that here, okay? Charlotte is at home, is likely the youngest, okay? She's probably not of college age yet. And so I'm guessing that she is a teenager. So if we deduce for a moment that Richard is the oldest and that Eugene and Elizabeth are in the middle, they're either second or third, pending. So now let's think about this for a moment. The 3 of the kids are still are in college. And if we just take them in the order that they're listed, we can infer that Richard is probably close to graduating, and he is probably about 22 years old. That makes, if Eugene is the second child, that makes him about 20 years old if we put 2 years between each child. And then we have Elizabeth, who would then be about 18 years old. And then we have Charlotte, who would probably be about 16 years old if we follow that 2-year rule. Now, you know, Charlotte could have come along much later. She could be 9 years old for all we know. But it gives us an estimated birth range for all of those children. So if we look at that, then Richard would be born at about 1918. How did I figure that out? Well, this is written in 1940, okay? If Richard is roughly 22 years old, we do the math backwards, then we can put an about birth date of 1918. Now, why would we do that? We'll talk more about that in a moment. But Eugene, if he is about 20 years old, then that would mean he was born at about 1920. And if Elizabeth is about 18 years old, that means she was born in about 1922. And if Charlotte is about 16 years old, that means she was born about 1924. So now we've got estimated birth dates for these children. So this goes on to say, and 2 brothers. Now, David T. Davis was mentioned earlier in the very first paragraph, and it now says David T. Davis of this city. So this city is either Plymouth or Wilkes-Barre. Now we have and Ever Davis, who is the other brother. Now, I'm going to infer from this, because David T. Davis was listed first, that he is the older of the 2, Ever Davis and David Davis. I'm going to guess that Ever Davis is younger. Ever Davis is a superintendent of Plymouth Mining Company. We don't know where David T. Davis or Ever fit in with Tally Davis, the guy who died. So we don't know exactly how those children line up. But being that Tally was 56 years old, David and Ever Davis are going to be in and around the 50s at the time of this. So we can then also make some guesstimates about their birth and put an about year in there if we wanted to. We could even use the same year as Tally Davis, who we think was born around 1884, because he's 56 years old at the time of his death in 1940. So we're totally guessing here. We have not done any research. We have not looked at a single record other than this obituary to infer all of this, okay? And Mr. and Mrs., this is going to be David T., right? Mr. and Mrs., before I even read any more, we have another relative right here, Mrs. Davis. We don't know her name. We don't even know her maiden name. We don't know her first name, but she's Mrs. David T. Davis. So he had a wife in 1940, and they were alive. They had not died yet. So now we can also take that information and add it to our family tree. And then we can also put a death date to be after the date of this article, which is the 15th of April, 1940. So we can say AFT period, you know, and put this date in of 1940. We also know that Ever Davis is with them as they left on Saturday for Medford. Okay, so Ever Davis is also alive. Okay, so now we can put a death date for Ever Davis to be after 1940. And they left on Saturday, and where they will attend the funeral services. Okay, so now we got the funeral services for Tally being held in Medford, Massachusetts. So now we know where the burial was. And that will be held on Monday afternoon. Okay, so that is actually probably the Monday, the same day that this article was published on April 15th, but it might have been Monday later, I doubt it. It's probably the 15th of April. Medford is a location. I don't know that to be a cemetery. So we don't have the exact cemetery necessarily. I don't even know at this point, without doing any research. I have no clue as to if Medford is a cemetery. I know it's a place, but beyond that, I don't know. All right, so here's the tree that I built. I just did this as a floating tree in my own tree. And if you want to learn more about floating trees, there's a whole other video on that. But just for the sake of exercise, I created this in one of my trees. Anyway, so we have Tally here. He's the guy who died. And we have his parents who are listed in the obituary. We have his wife, Teresa, who is listed in his obituary. David T. Davis, who is his brother. And we know that David was married to somebody, Mrs. David T. Davis. And we know that he had a brother, Ever. And one of the things I forgot to mention was Ever is likely single at this time because there's not another wife listed in the obituary as, part of the family. So because Ever and David, Mr. and Mrs. David and Ever travel to the funeral. So that makes me think that Ever here was not married. Then Tally and Teresa have 4 children. Now I just roughed out their ages. That doesn't mean that Charlotte and Eugene and Elizabeth are in the right order here. But I have Richard listed here. And, I'm just kind of roughing out the ideas as to who the oldest children was. I'm sure that the oldest child was Richard. All right. So with that information, we can then drill over into Tally's profile and take a look and see what we have come up with over here. Now, I have not looked at the hints that are popping up. One of the reasons why I do it this way, I pull all that information out, and there's a lot more that I didn't even talk about. I pull all that information out because it's going to help pull hints starting to populate, right? So we put an about birth year of 1884. That doesn't mean it's right. We know he was born in Plymouth according to the obituary. We've got some educational information, which might give us some leads to some yearbooks maybe. We know he was employed at the Cunningham Company first, so I gave an estimated year for that because I was guessing that if he was born in 1884, and let's say he was about 20 years old when he first got his first job, then I guessed that about 1904. Now with more investigation, we might actually figure that out. But one of the reasons why I did that was because I wanted to list his employment in chronological order according to the obituary. So then he is a sales manager for the Susquehanna Collieries, I believe it is pronounced. I put him in about 1910 as working for them because we know about 1920 he's in Medford working for the Atlantic Coal Company. So I'm putting all of these about and before types of dates in here so we can kind of rough out a timeline in his profile. Now we also know that he was living maybe around 1910 on High Street, Plymouth, right? He was probably a young man at that point. And so we're, again, making notes in here that this is a rough estimate on the dates. And employment in 1920, we talked about that Atlantic Coal Company. In 1940, when he died, we know he was living there. So we can infer, going backwards, that we know he was working there for the last 20 years. So we know that he probably ended his time in Buffalo, New York around 1920 because it said prior to living in Medford, he was living in Buffalo for a few years. So I put before 1920. Now the timeline here on Ancestry is going to nail only the year that I put in there. But we could guess it could have been, 1915 to 1920 that he was living there. So once we start digging into the research phase of this, we might be able to find some city directories, some census records. Who knows what we might find where he is there. So I basically was able to rough out, you know, what he was doing, where he was working, and all of these clues are basic estimates other than, well, even his birth year is an estimate. The only thing we know for sure is when he died and where he died, along with all of the other family members that we managed to pop up. We've even got some siblings here. So collectively, we came up with 10 or 11 ancestors, right? All right, so now why do we do this? Why do we rough out an estimated about dates and places? So with all of those facts kind of roughed out in a timeline with even estimated dates, we can let the systems work for us and start coming up with hints. So let's take a look at what kind of hints. Now I have not done any research. You can see here the sources is only this one obituary. So now let's go look at the hints. Well, looky there. There is a photograph. And it looks like, according to this, if this is his photograph, his name is Taliesin. No wonder he's called Tally, because Tally's traditionally a woman's name. But because the obituary referred to he and him, and he was married to a woman named Teresa, we know that he was male. So there's another fact for you. Okay. Okay. So look at these hints. Holy cow. We've got photographs. We've got member trees. We've got census records. We have a ton of records that we can play with and try and find more information about this ancestor. We have got a lot going on here. So this is all really great. We go back to look at the tree. We could then go through all the profiles. I think you're getting the idea, though. We have found a lot. We found 11 ancestors. We found 70 clues. There's the answer to your question. I found 70 clues, hints, leads, sources. There was actually 2 sources. I don't know if you noticed it or not. The newspaper article itself is one source. And in the newspaper article, at one point, they mentioned that relatives, local relatives, meaning Plymouth relatives, had alerted the newspaper that Tally had died. So there were actually 2 sources there. We're not exactly sure who the relatives were, but we know after doing a little bit of extraction of information from the obituary that David and Ever were living in Plymouth along with David's wife. And so we know those people were probably the ones who informed the newspaper and likely were a pretty good source. So all in all, I found 70 tips, clues, leads, facts that I pulled out of this. Plus, I found 17 new research questions that are things like, what's Tally's middle name? Starts with an E. What's David's middle name? Starts with a T. What's David's wife's name? All we know is Mrs. David T. Davis, right? We know that Ever is probably single, and we might want to investigate that more. And we want to know, you know, all of the children and a little bit more about their lives. So, I mean, there was a lot of research questions that came out of this one obituary that was only 7 paragraphs long, 200 and I think it was 81 words total. And so we found a lot of information. I hope that was helpful. There is a free handout for this if you want to see all the answers that I found. And that is going to be over at genealogytv.org. All you have to do is click on the handouts tab, drop down. It's labeled as $0. So all you have to do is click on that and you can add it to your cart, check out for no dollars, and it's all yours. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. Tell me, hopefully you didn't cheat and sneak a peek at the answers before you put it in the comment sections, but I'd be curious to know how many clues you found in that obituary. So put it in the comment sections below. I'd love it. All right, well, I have more videos on the screen for your binge watching pleasure, so we'll catch you next time.